So Associate Professor of International Business and Strategy at Auckland University of Technology, and adjacent full professor at the School of Economics and Business in Slovenia, and a visiting professor at Zhejiang University, School of Management in China. He was also a Fulbright Fellow at Harvard University, FAST Sociology, and is currently Vice President Administration at the Academy of International Business. It's more to come. Matt also has his own consultant company, and a fun fact, he was also a professor to many of us in the core during his time at Victoria University as well. So welcome, Matt, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Greg. Kia ora koutou katoa and talofa lava. I think it's Samoan Language Week. Namaste, Nyanshimen, Shenshimen, Dajiang Hao. It's great to connect with some of my former students. So I would first like to give a big shout out to Greg, Sophie, and Oyang, who were in some way either my students or who I've closely interacted with. I also see Lizzie Valentine, a former colleague associate of mine in the MBA program. So a special shout out to Lizzie as well. And it's great connecting with Janelle and all of you. I understand most of you are based in New Zealand, some perhaps in Australia, but it's a fantastic opportunity, and storytelling is something that I feel very, very passionate about. It's obviously a very broad topic, but I think in the 30 minutes that we have kind of assigned for this topic, hopefully we can get you excited enough to then continue on your journey. And as Greg has pointed out, I'm currently based at Auckland University of Technology, which, if you ask me, is the best university in New Zealand, but I might be partially biased, right? So Auckland Ligong Dashue. Okay. So, sorry about that. To set the scene, right? Storytelling, we all love a good story, right? It kind of breaks through and it touches us in a way that not many other things touch us in terms of data or statistics. And I've come across this old Indian proverb, which I think really sets the scene, right? And the proverb says, tell me a fact and I learn, tell me the truth and I believe, but tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever, right? So stories connect with our mind, with our heart. They are eternal in some ways. And if you hear a good story, it will stay with you for a lifetime, and it will actually help you remember so many different things. And as educators, I think one of the ways that we can really make an impact through our teaching is by telling stories. But what is storytelling? And I apologize, I have to provide a definition, but don't get too excited about it because it's a very dry kind of academic definition. But storytelling is basically sense-making currency for stakeholders. By telling a story, we are trying to make sense of things in a certain way that will bring additional understanding, insight, that will prompt action. Because otherwise, we can just overload them with data and statistics. And there is a difference between narrative and stories. So narratives connect agents in a specific time, in a specific place. They organize a sequence of events, right? So we live in a world of narrative economics. But stories are imbued with meaning. Stories have an emotional charge. Stories are personal. Stories are subjective. And stories focus on the actors and their agency, right? So a good story is like a good film or a good book. It focuses on the actor and it focuses on their journey. So the analogy that I like to use is stories are journeys. And by telling a story, we are taking our audience on a journey. But why do we need data storytelling, right? Everyone is so busy, everyone is upskilling themselves. Well, if you look at the latest World Economic Forum report on what are the top 10 skills that are really sought after in the next 5 years or so, at the top of that list, you will find analytical thinking, and innovation. And stories actually are surprisingly analytical, right? Stories help us make sense or give sense to complex issues. We can talk about climate change, we can talk about economic crises, we can talk about many issues. And by putting a face and a story around these issues, they become real, not just some sort of abstract notion. Stories kind of nag in our brain, make us think, they linger with us, and they prompt us to ask ourselves questions, they prompt us to act. So stories actually are very, very important for promoting and stimulating critical thinking and analysis. Reasoning, problem solving, and ideation. Albert Einstein famously said that the true measure of intelligence is imagination and creativity. And stories help us to imagine, they help us to dream. And these are all essential skills that we need in today's world fraught with many wicked problems. So if we look at the top 10 skills that are and will continue to be in demand, particularly the soft skills, the problem-solving skills, we see that storytelling in some way connects to at least 4 out of this 10. And if you go online, there are so many online courses. So Harvard Business School Online offers quite a few courses on storytelling, on data storytelling, on data-driven decision-making. And finally, the content that is being offered around storytelling seems to finally be catching up with this incredible landscape of business analysis. And finally, particularly edX is focusing on how business analysts can actually tell stories with data. And it's not just the top universities around the world, like Harvard or MIT. Also in New Zealand, you have almost all universities that have some sort of data storytelling insights, short courses or micro-credentials. Auckland University of Technology has partnered with Institute for Data and runs a special short course on data science and artificial intelligence. But storytelling isn't just a craft, it isn't just an art, there's actually quite a bit of science behind it. And we as human beings kind of have 2 mechanisms that, importantly shape how we interact with the world and how we make sense of the world. And without getting too theoretical, let's just call them the mind and the heart. So we have a need for cognition. We have a need when we see something to label it, to assign meaning to it, to make sense of it, to understand it, right? And that is our need for cognition. What we see, what we hear, we immediately try to classify it. But we are also social living beings, and we also have feelings. We need to feel connected to something greater than ourselves. We need to feel, we need to empathize, we need to connect. So these 2 mechanisms are very important to how we function as human beings. And good stories connect both with our need for cognition. They help us make sense. They sometimes give sense to events that seem senseless, but they also help us to connect, to feel we are part of something bigger. Storytelling helps us memorize things, right? Psychological research shows that if you were to dump a whole bunch of numbers and statistics onto the audience, they would probably remember on average about 5% of those statistics. If we tell a story, studies show that about 63% of the message and the content that we convey, people will remember. So stories are an incredible way of storing large amounts of memory. And if we look at, for example, at various indigenous cultures or prehistoric cultures, here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we have Tangata Whenua, so the indigenous population of Maori. And even before they had written language, all that information and knowledge got passed from one generation to another through storytelling. And once you start kind of unpeeling the stories, right? One of the quintessential New Zealand stories is about how Maui fished out the South Island from the sea. And once you start actually understanding that story, you see that there is a lot of information about movement of the sun, about tides, a lot of wisdom and knowledge that has been accumulated over the generations. Stories are persuasive. We can use facts, we can use data, but stories are the ones that really resonate with us and help us to connect with the stories that we have about ourselves, who we are, where we come from, what is important to us. And stories engage us. Hearing a good story energizes us. It draws us into the problem or the concept or the topic. Stories help us and help persuade even the most skeptical, the most critical. Stories make us curious. I think there's some background noise. So enough about storytelling. What is data storytelling? Well, if we use the analogy of Lego blocks, right? You can have a whole pile of various colored Lego blocks, and that is data. And as data analysts, we look at all the data that is coming in, and there's so many points of data, and there's always, I would say, an overabundance of data. And if we look at that data, it tends to resemble an angry fruit salad, right? It looks like a Jackson Pollock painting. So what we tend to usually do is we start sorting that data, right? And for example, if we are looking at Lego blocks of different shapes and colors, probably the first thing that we will do is we will arrange them according to colors. So we sort them out, we sift them, and then we start arranging them. And the next step is we start to visualize them and present them visually, right? So there can be some sort of ranking, highest to lowest, or according to shapes. And where storytelling comes in is it takes this presented visual data and it builds it into a story that is about actors, that is about certain plots, and that is about a specific setting. So the difference between analyzing data, working with data, and data storytelling is actually the difference between this messy pile of various kinds of building blocks and the house in which two people live with their two kids, a Volvo parked in front of the house, and a golden retriever. And after we have created that story, then comes the question, what do we do with it? And it's here where we then derive actionable insights. A good story will prompt us, will energize us, will compel us to actually act. But where does data storytelling actually fit in a typical career path of a business analyst? All right, I'm by no means an expert on business analysis, but I've borrowed this from edX, right? And usually business analysts would follow either a functional analyst career pathway or a data analyst career pathway. And within the data analyst career pathway, you can be a data scientist or a data systems developer. So storytelling is definitely more on the data analyst side. So I would probably say this slide is the most important out of the lot, right? Storytelling has certain components, no matter if you use it in business, in decision-making, if you use it in the creative arts. And the first element in a good story is always about the actors, the characters. So when we as data analysts are thinking about coming up with a compelling story, we need to first think of who are the characters in this story. Are these the customers? Are these the frontline workers? Are these the senior managers? Who are our characters? And making them really alive, making them real people, putting a face to them, creating a persona. After we have the characters, storytelling is about plots. And I will talk a little bit about these plots later on, but it's, we all know the hero's journey, right? Someone that has overcome insurmountable obstacles and triumphed in the end. So we also need to understand what's the plot that is driving our story. Is it, a fall from grace? Is it a learning journey? Is it a hero's journey? What's the plot that is actually driving our story? The third component is the setting, right? Are we talking about a specific organizational setting? Are we talking about the market? Are we talking about a physical market, an online market, right? The setting itself is also very, very important. The context, the environment, the timing. And a good story helps to resolve a tension, a problem, a conflict, or helps to capitalize on an opportunity. So storytelling is about characters, it's about plots, it's about settings, and it's about resolving a problem, a conflict, or capitalizing on an opportunity. What is then data storytelling? For data storytelling, obviously you need data, right? So that's the starting point. But data is descriptive, it can be diagnostic, it can be predictive or prescriptive. Data storytelling is taking that data and linking it with a narrative, right? And as we've said, a narrative focuses on the actors, it arranges them it situates them in a specific time and place. It introduces a causal logic, a sequence of events towards a final goal. A very important part of data storing is visualization, right? We don't say for nothing that a picture says 1,000 words, and the example that I provided with the Lego blocks perhaps illustrates that most nicely. Visualizations are not just sexy or catchy, they actually help to make sense or sometimes give sense to things. And the final point of data storytelling is actionable insights. It is coming up with not just recommendations, but kind of the tip of the recommendations as cues for action and decision making. A recommendation is, when you say, we recommend that the company does this and this and this. An actionable insight is it gives agency, and it's a cue. When somebody reads an actionable insight, they will say to themselves, oh, I need to do this. This needs to be addressed, right? This is a significant problem. This is a significant problem for our stakeholders. Oops, sorry. So what are the benefits of data storytelling? Well, first of all, by through compelling data storytelling, it builds up your confidence, right? You are in charge, you're telling the story, you transform yourself into a storyteller. For me personally, it helps to kind of manage my inner imposter syndrome. But data storytelling also allows you to kind of distance yourself from any kind of organizational or office politics. By telling stories, you are not directly, let's say, confronting anyone. Good stories engage you as the storyteller, engage the audience, so they build up proactivity. All of a sudden you get excited because your mind and your heart are engaged. So it helps you to be more proactive. And good stories resonate with people, they empower people. So good storytelling also allows us better management and strategic leadership. It's by no coincidence that great strategic leaders always, when they set out a vision for the future, will use some sort of personal story or some sort of compelling story arc. So here we see what are kind of the nuts and bolts of storytelling, data storytelling, and what are some of the benefits. And I'll give you an example, right? Let's say New Zealand, right? New Zealand is a country that when you go overseas, you really realize what a powerful country New Zealand is, and that the brand of New Zealand is casts a very powerful halo effect over anything that New Zealand companies do overseas. And for the longest time, when it came to information and telling the story of New Zealand, and New Zealand is actually one of the few countries in the world that has a storytelling agency. So maybe a fun fact. And this is how New Zealand used to present itself to the world. A whole bunch of data and statistics, right? Population, unemployment, GDP, exports, imports, life expectancy. And chances are, you can have a look at this. In 1 hour time, you will probably just remember there's 5.1 million people in New Zealand. Right? So that kind of confirms our 5% retention rate. But here's an example, right? What if we tell a story of New Zealand as an agricultural but very innovation-driven economy? What if we say that New Zealand is the 4th largest exporters of seeds in the world? That 60% of all carrot seeds in the world are actually grown in New Zealand. You might be in the United States, and when you hear this statistic, you will never look at a carrot the same way again. When you will have a carrot in your hand, you will make that connection to New Zealand. Here is another example, right? New Zealand is a very small country, particularly if you compare it to much larger countries like, for example, China or India or Brazil. But did you know that New Zealand controls about 6% of the total airspace in the world? So it is a small country, but it actually is quite an important player when it comes to the airspace industry. Coincidentally, there is a saying in Mandarin Chinese that a sparrow might be a small bird, but it has all the parts for flying, right? So we can use that analogy as well. So this is just an example of what good data storytelling actually does. It takes a whole bunch of information and data that we very easily get overwhelmed with and that we very easily forget, and it packages it in a way that it stays for us for a very long time. For those of you that are more interested on kind of data storytelling, particularly at the national level, the New Zealand Story Group has a fantastic library. They call it the Toolkit. It's freely available. And if you just go on the link below and register, you can access a wealth of these infographics that can really be as an inspiration to how data storytelling can really transform the way that we tell data. And slowly coming to the end, right? So we've looked at why storytelling matters. We've touched a little bit upon the psychology of storytelling. But the question is, how do you tell good stories? Well, the first suggestion that I would have is, we need to understand the purpose, right? Storytelling is not just spinning narrative, right? We can talk about carrots and we can talk about aerospace, but the purpose behind telling these stories is, in the case of the New Zealand Story Group, was to show that New Zealand is more than just this 100% pure agricultural paradise, that New Zealand is actually a nation of tech and innovation and becoming a very important player in the aerospace industry. So we always need to very, very well understand what's the purpose behind our storytelling. but we also need to understand the purpose of our audience. So this purposefulness needs to be bi-directional. And good stories are those where our purpose of telling a story actually connects and interacts with the purpose on the other side, the side of the audience. What is their problem? What are their challenges? So the first thing is really the difference between spinning narrative, having a yarn, and storytelling is this purposefulness. And good storytelling is all about knowing your audience really, really, really well. Because a good story is a story where the audience's self-story and experience connects with the narrative of the story that you're trying to tell. And if you're able to connect the supply side and demand side of storytelling, it's where the magic actually happens. There's been a lot of psychological research going back over 100 years. And we as people, as human beings, we all have what psychologist Carl Jung would call collective unconsciousness. We all have certain stories that are in our minds that we have observed as children in the environments in which we are. And these stories are replicated through archetypes such as myths, legends, symbols, poems, and so on. And the reason why the hero journey resonates so well usually with people is because it taps into that collective unconsciousness and the myths and the legends about people that have overcome insurmountable obstacles. So the second tip is really to create that storytelling magic. We need to not only understand the nuts and bolts of storytelling, we need to not only be purposeful in our storytelling, but we need to understand our audience really, really well. And we need to understand what kind of stories about themselves, who they are, where they come from. So as BAs in an organization, we need to understand who are the people working in our organization. What are their backgrounds? What is the story of the organization and the history? And by aligning our purposeful storytelling with the stories that are in them, it's where the magic actually happens. There's been a lot of research and a lot of books published on all these kind of different archetypal stories. And generally, right, there are kind of 7 large archetypes, right? So for example, the first archetype is overcoming the monster. If you are a small high-tech company and you're going against a large multinational, right? Telling the story in terms of overcoming the monster. Or a rags to riches story, a story of a journey, right? A lot of strategic decisions are about embarking on a journey. A story of return, comedy, tragedy, or rebirth. So there are certain story archetypes that are ingrained in our psyche, part of our collective unconsciousness, that we can actually tap into. But every story starts with a premise. And a premise is, a very simple 1-sentence kind of general idea of a story. So if I can borrow an example from the film industry, Jurassic Park. The premise of Jurassic Park is that when man plays God, things backfire, right? Genetically manipulating and bringing back the dinosaurs ends in disaster. So the core idea behind the story is the premise, and we need to understand what that premise is. Good storytelling is about understanding the psychology of curiosity. And the sweet spot in terms of getting the curiosity of our audience is when they have a certain level of knowledge about the topic. If they're completely ignorant about the topic, it will require too much cognitive effort, or they might simply not connect. If they have too much knowledge about the topic, then they will kind of switch off. So harnessing the psychology of curiosity is really about finding that middle ground sweet spot where they have enough knowledge to be invested in what you're trying to tell them. A good story always has a hook, or it has a plot or a twist, an unexpected turn. Right? So it's finding that surprise element somewhere in the middle of the story that makes things interesting. And harnessing the psychology of curiosity is also about establishing credibility that you are not the world's greatest expert on this, or that you are not completely unprepared for that. So it is finding that middle ground, that sweet spot of middle-level knowledge, middle-level surprise, and middle-level confidence, where we are really able to harness the psychology of curiosity. So before I finish, we've talked a lot about storytelling and why storytelling is important. What are the nuts and bolts of storytelling? A little bit about the psychology of storytelling. We've provided some tips. But how does it all come to life? And I would just like to share with you a commercial by Steinlager, the famous New Zealand brewery, that shows when you are able to bring that storytelling together, it's where the magic happens. So let's play this. Hopefully this video will work. And then we will open for questions. Oops, sorry. Oh, there's no video. Okay. Then I think, yeah, let's just go without the video, Greg.
It won't be one moment. I just got to get the right slide over into here, and then it should be okay. So I've been having a few technical troubles, Matt, today, so I do apologize.
No worries.
In regards to this. This has been one of those days, unfortunately.
Well, as someone that has had to teach through COVID, and I think, you know, Sophie, and you yourself were on the receiving end of that. I've seen it all. So no.
I appreciate your understanding there. And I believe this is the one here. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the one.
Awesome. So let me just bring this to full screen, and hopefully we hit play. See again, a little technical issue. Apologies, team. Okay, and I hit play here, and should be good.
I still get goosebumps anytime I see this commercial. It basically shows what good storytelling is about, right? The purposefulness, the story archetype, the setting, and it also tells, you know, how we immediately connect with it because we project our own struggles, we project our own challenges, and our own quest for meaning and belonging and impact. Okay, thank you very much. This was my short stint. There's a wealth of information on storytelling, and feel free to reach out if you want any additional tips. And I really look forward now to this second part where hopefully we can engage in some questions and answers.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Matt, firstly for the amazing discussion on data storytelling. For myself personally, you've made a very complex topic incredibly simple and very easy to understand. And secondly, lots of tips also to take into the workplace as well, as I'll be dealing with some data story challenges myself coming up in the near future. So I'm looking forward to putting these into practice. All right, so I'm just going to bring up our question Q&A section. So bear with me, everyone, as we just get through this here, and hopefully this is going to work. We've been having a few issues here. But while I'm getting this organized, Matt, I will ask you one question just to kick things off. What's your favorite story from either your career or from what you've heard from your friends about using data to influence your stakeholders or like an organization's direction?
Ooh, that's a good question. The story that I like to tell as someone that has been for quite a few years talking about business with China or business in China is, you know, you can, and this was mainly to Western students that have never been to China or have a very limited understanding of China, obviously don't speak Mandarin Chinese. And the story that I like to tell is we have a lot of discussions around, you know, how about, you know, global rivalry and geopolitics, and, you know, you get some really strong feelings about, you know, how Chinese companies are really aggressive and really competitive and so on. And then I asked the students, you know, what percentage of the global population does China have, right? And then we kind of get down to the fact that China has about 6% of the global population. And I say, but we get down to the fact that China has around 18%, 18% of the global population. And I say, but, you know, what's China's surface? And it's about 6%. And when you juxtapose that, you know, a country that has 6% of the global land area, but where it has to feed 18% of the global population, then they kind of realize that this is a very competitive market. So I don't know if that's the story that you were going for, but it's putting those data and that information and then linking it to real people and real stories is how it actually connects with people and how you change boundaries in people's minds. So that's one story that as an educator, I like to draw on. And hopefully change some of my students' minds.
Okay, very nice. Thank you for that, Matt. The second question, I'm almost there to get this set up. How can one practice and enhance their data storytelling skills? Any tips on finding an eager audience?
Well, I would definitely say some people are natural born storytellers. If you are not a natural born storyteller, find a kind audience where you feel safe. And I very often, what has made me, I think, a better storyteller as an academic and as a researcher or as a consultant is when I'm trying to explain a complex topic to 6-year-old children, or when I'm trying to explain a very complex topic to my grandparents. So find an audience that you feel safe, that you know will not judge you. And, you know, storytelling is, yes, there's a lot of art and craft and science behind it, but you also need to tell storytelling. You need to perfect that craft. You need to practice it. You need to read books. You need to watch movies. You need to be an open person, a curious person. You need to enjoy the arts, and then bringing all of those influences and life experiences. I think one of the most important things for any storyteller is to actually be willing to open yourself up and to be vulnerable. to lean into your background and use your experiences and your life's journey, either professional or personal. And it is where you are able, with a great deal of credibility, to actually tell a story. What I've also begun to realize is that you also need to understand and exercise critical judgment which stories you can actually tell and which stories are not yours to tell. So do you have a skin in the game, in the problem, where you have the credibility to actually tell that story? Or are you just, as an outside observer, looking at a phenomenon and, kind of trying to make sense of it? And I've realized that here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, that many of the stories that I wanted to tell, many Maori myths and legends, were actually not mine to tell, because I was an outsider. I was a Pakeha. I was a white man. And even if I wanted to show the utmost care and sensitivity to the topic, some stories simply were not mine to tell.
Okay, thanks for that, Matt. It's very, very good advice. And got a few more questions here, and this kind of leads on actually about the topic of, finding the audience to tell the right story to, as you just mentioned. So how to tell a good story to a group of audience with very different backgrounds and knowledge levels.
So I would say whenever you have heterogeneity of an audience or of a topic, the worst thing that you want to do or can do is actually try and please everyone or cater to everyone. So in cross-cultural research, we have something that we call third spaces. So if everyone is coming from a different background, you need to create some sort of neutral third space where everyone will be able to have an equal footing. Because if I'm speaking to an audience and 80% are BAs, but 20% are marketeers, right? Trying to merge BA and marketing, in the end, nobody's going to be happy. But if I somehow create a third space and address a topic that is of relevance to BAs, but not directly part of what they do, and of relevance to marketing, but not directly what they do, you've kind of created that safe third space that brings in the heterogeneity. So don't try to please everyone. Don't try to smooth things over. Don't try to converge everything, but create a third space.
Very, very good advice there, Matt. Well, switch it up actually is a fun question here that I see kind of bringing into the world of technology as we are moving into the AI age, if you will. So can you provide examples of successful data storytelling projects that utilize AI technologies, if there's any that come to mind?
So I have to be completely honest with you. I'm not aware of any recent examples where AI would be used. I think where AI can be incredibly useful is in collecting data, analyzing data. But AI, I don't think can be useful in a sense. It cannot provide us insights into our audience. So I think AI can be an incredibly powerful tool. AI can help us with, story arcs. AI can help us do research about myths and legends and problems that companies and organizations and industries have faced in the past. But I think I'm not sure that AI will ever be able to bring in that human element to storytelling. But long story short, I'm not aware of any examples where AI would be really used in a way to create really powerful storytelling yet.
Okay. So it's still quite a gap, I suppose, to fill the human element.
Yes. So I think it can be leveraged in the data analysis part and in the visualization part, but infusing that human element, that meaning, and connecting with the audience, I think that is something that only human beings can do.
Okay, very, very true then, very true. All right, I think we've got time for a couple more questions. So this one here, I'm not sure this is gonna quite make sense, but how can data be visualized and utilized in a non-data context for storytelling purposes?
I mean, I think that's actually a really, really good question. I think, you know, if I tell the fable of the 6 blind men trying to tell what an elephant is, right? I think hopefully everyone knows the fable, right? So 6 blind men were asked to basically say what an elephant is. And the first one grabbed the trunk and he said, oh, you know, elephant is a really strong animal. It's a bit like a snake. And the one at the back grabbed the tail and said, oh, the elephant, you know, is like rope. It's very thin. And then the third person on the side, on the flank, you know, kind of said, oh, the elephant's really sturdy as a plank or as a brick wall. So if I were to show you a picture of an elephant, right? It's telling a story of the animal. It's telling the story of the 6 blind men. There might be data behind it, but we don't actually realize that there is data behind it. I think good storytelling transcends data. I think good storytelling can use data and utilize data, and good stories always have a lot of information, even stories about myths and legends. Even the legend of how Maui fished out the South Island. Once you start unpeeling, you actually realize that there's a lot of very useful information about the tides, about the seasons, about the movement of the sun, and so on. So I'm not sure if I answered that really well. It's a complicated question and a really good one at that.
Okay, and well, got a few more actually come up. So quite a few more. So thank you, Barnabas and Peter. But I'll go to a nice easy one for you, Matt. Do you have any recommendations for courses or programs at AUT that would be helpful gaining knowledge in the field of business analysis? Thank you.
Well, to the best of my understanding, I think that AUT does have a BA program. Definitely checking the business and informations department. So BA recently just launched a new kind of micro-credentials course in partnership with Data Institute. And actually a couple of courses. There's one on cybersecurity, which is, you know, obviously a very important topic. There is one on data-informed decision-making and I think artificial intelligence. So I think there's quite a few courses. And if you go to the slides, there's actually information about one of those courses.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I'm just going to combine the next question because it's quite similar. So what are some tools that have great features for data storytelling? And another one would be, what are some of the new developments you've seen maybe in data visualization?
So as a non-technical, not particularly IT savvy person, I would say that you don't want to go overboard with the tools, right? Good storytelling doesn't need fancy tools. I think good storytelling needs imagination, needs life experience, and needs insight into the audience. So I would actually be a little bit wary. And I think there are many people that can do visualizations and that are graphic designers or visual designers. I think where the role of the BA comes in is, you know, thinking about how do you translate a problem and the data connected to that problem. How do you translate it? How do you create that bridge between managers and decision makers and actually the data side of business. So I would actually caution BAs, particularly, kind of mid-career and senior BAs, of going down the rabbit hole of trying out, because there's so many different tools. It's a little bit like with teamwork, right? You can have Miro and you can have Teams, and in the end, you end up with 20 different apps, and then it kind of defies the purpose. So I think good storytelling should be as low tech as possible. And then once you know what the story is and what the storytelling is, then outsource the data visualization bit to someone that can then make really nice infographics.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we're also coming to an end, so we'll just switch back to the main PowerPoint. But thank you everyone for your questions, and sorry I couldn't get to all of them. A big thank you again to Matt for your amazing presentation, and if you like, you could send a nice little reaction his way.
Thank you very much.
There. And yes, again, like I mentioned before, it's a very complex topic and not many people do it well in New Zealand, but I think you've given us the sweet science and art form that we can all take into our future careers in becoming much better storytellers.
Thank you very much, and best of luck with your group. 600 members is an impressive number, and good luck with all of your careers. You can find me on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out.
That's great. Thank you so much again for the kind words, Matt. So before we finish up, just a little shout out. I won't share the screen in full, but our next talk will be coming up, which will be adapting to the New Zealand workplace in conjunction, hosted by our Summer of Tech. So this will be presented by Sophie Chen, our founder, and myself, and we'll be delving into some of the nuances of working in New Zealand for the first time, whether it's your first time working here as a new student, coming into the professional workplace, or someone who's perhaps moved from overseas and are now facing some very different, unique challenges that we only find here in New Zealand. So again, thank you everyone for the time today on the 1st of June, and we look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. So bye-bye everyone.
Kakitiano, bye-bye.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sophie. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks
See
everyone
ya.
joining today.